Let me begin by telling you, Mr. Chairman, how grateful I am to you and other members of the committee for offering your apologies. I do hope that the government will eventually and officially apologize. Forgive me for not being with you in person. I am forced to appear by video link because the US government prevents me from coming there. Even though 5 years have passed since my original detention, and I have never been charged with any crime in any country. Let me be clear, I am not a terrorist. I am not a member of Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist group. I am a father, a husband, and an engineer. I am also a victim of the immoral practice of extraordinary rendition. I'm here today to tell you about what happened to me and how I was detained and interrogated by the United States government, transported to Syria against my will, tortured, and kept there for a year. I'm here today because I believe it is my moral duty as a human being to help prevent what happened to me from happening to others. The America I see and I hear about today is not the same America I admired when I lived there from 1999 to early 2001. Back then, I decided to learn from the professional American business culture by taking a high-tech job in Boston that I hoped would eventually allow me to start my own business in Canada. In September 2002, I was returning to Canada for work from a family trip to Tunis, where my wife and children stayed behind with my ailing father-in-law. My return flight to Montreal connected through JFK Airport in New York. Upon viewing my valid Canadian passport, an immigration officer pulled me aside and took me to be fingerprinted and photographed. I asked to make a phone call, but my request was denied. Sometime later, officers from the FBI and the New York Police Department arrived and began to interrogate me. My repeated requests for a lawyer were all denied. I was told that I had no right to a lawyer because I was not an American citizen. The interrogation on that first day lasted about 8 hours, during which I was insulted and humiliated, and continued the next day, at the end of which they asked me to volunteer to go to Syria. Of course, I refused, and I told them that I wanted to go to Canada. I was then taken to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, where I was kept for the next 10 days. After 5 days of repeated requests, I was finally allowed to make a brief phone call to alert my family of my whereabouts. More than a week passed before I was allowed to finally meet briefly with a lawyer on October 5th. At 9 o'clock the next day at night, on a Sunday, I was informed that my lawyer was waiting to see me. I was taken out of my cell and into a room where about 7 people or 7 officials were waiting for me. To my surprise, my lawyer was not there. When I asked them where my lawyer was, they told me he refused to come. They questioned me for about 6 hours until 3 in the morning, and that was despite my repeated requests for my lawyer to be present and despite my request to see a judge. They mainly asked me why I did not want to go to Syria. I clearly and repeatedly told them that I was afraid I would be tortured there. I told them I would be tortured because I was being wrongly accused of being a member of Al-Qaeda. I also conveyed to them my fear of returning to Syria, given that I had not fulfilled my compulsory military service. My pleas fell on deaf ears. On October 8th, at 3 in the morning, I was awakened and told that they had decided to remove me to Syria. When I told them again about my fears of being tortured, they told me they were not the office that deals with the torture convention. By then it was becoming more and more clear to me that I was being sent to Syria for the purpose of being tortured. I was put on a private jet and flown to Jordan, then driven to Syria, and eventually ended up at the Palestine branch of the Syrian military intelligence on October 9th. There I was put in a dark underground cell that was more like a grave. It was 3 feet wide, 6 feet deep, and 7 feet high. Life in that cell was hell. I spent 10 months and 10 days in that grave. During the early days of my detention, I was interrogated and physically tortured. I was beaten with an electrical cable and threatened with a metal chair, the tire, and electric shocks. I was forced to falsely confess that I had been to Afghanistan. When I was not being beaten, I was put in a waiting room so that I could hear the screams of other prisoners. The cries of the women still haunt me the most. Over the next 10 months, the only time I left my cell was to be interrogated or for meetings with the Canadian consul. I was allowed to meet with the consul 7 times, but only in the controlled presence of Syrian officials. I was warned prior to those meetings not to say how I was being treated. During the last visit, however, I burst out yelling about the beatings and the horrible conditions I had been living in. After 374 days of torture and wrongful detention, I was finally released to Canadian Embassy officials on October 5th, 2003. These past few years have been a nightmare for me. Since my return to Canada, my physical pain has slowly healed, but the cognitive and psychological scars from my ordeal remain with me on a daily basis. I still have nightmares and recurring flashbacks. I have lost confidence in myself, and I live in constant fear of flying and being kidnapped again. I am not the same person that I was. I have come to accept this as part of my new life, but I want to make sure that no one else has to go through what I have gone through. In sharing my story and my experiences with you today, I hope that the effects of torturing a human being will be better understood. I also hope to convey how fragile our human rights have become and how easily they can be taken from us by the same governments that have sworn to protect them. Thank you very much. I look forward to answering your questions.